everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Untangling Talent and Teamwork, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Marcia Hughes and James Bradford Terrell. My name is Sarah. I'll moderate the webinar today. It will be about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can type them into the questions box. We'll be answering these questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or in an email if we do run out of time. And then also note, we have handouts that can be downloaded through GoToWebinar. It's in the Handouts tab in your dashboard. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Sarah. This is Marcia Hughes, but I'm not hearing anything more from you.
Mark, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird. Yep. All right. So, yep, you can go ahead. We're live now.
All right.
Well, actually, can you type into attendees? If you hear anything, can you type into the chat box to let us know? Okay, yes, perfect. All right, sorry about that. Go ahead, Marcia and James.
All right, thank you so very much. Well, I'm Marcia Hughes. I'm the president of Collaborative Growth. My background is in law and psychology. I have been working on emotional intelligence across our wonderful world for approaching 20 years now. It's very exciting. So that's a bit about me.
Hi, James Terrell here. My background's in mental health and communications, and we've been working on this for about the same amount of time, and we are still thrilled. After 20 years, we're still excited to do this kind of work.
Today, we are talking, as you know, about untangling talent and teamwork. And you can see that we have 4 specific goals that we're focusing on for today. Understanding why talent and teams tangle and what we mean by that. And just to even begin it, we're talking about why individuals on the team, maybe the star performers, some of the folks that you really need and get maybe the most attention. What happens when you give individual attention to those people, but then some of the team members feel left out, so you're not getting that collective energy at the highest level. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. We'll be talking about combining the roles of being an individual performer as well as a good team member, and I think this is sometimes confusing for folks. And sometimes people even hold back because they want to be a good team member, and so they don't think they should present their full-scale individual skills. And so that's part of what we want to address here, and of course be responding to your questions at the end of this webinar. We'll talk about how to apply the right metrics for diagnosing teams and give you some very real solid strategies to expand the talents of your team. First, we'd like to know something more about you. So we're going to go to a poll, Sarah. And in this poll, we're asking you where you work, because we want to know a little bit more about you. I'm seeing lots from HR, OD, team building, other. So I was curious what's other. We've got lots of people coming in fast. Thank you so much. Sometimes people are kind of slow at this, but you guys are great. So we're going to give you just a little more time. And I know, Sarah, when you're ready, you're going to close it out and let us see these results. Okay. What we have are 12% from HR, 15% from OD, 12% in consulting, 14% of you are saying you emphasize team building, and 46% in other. Well, I'd love to know what all of that is. Well, thank you so much. Now, as we're moving forward, let me just tell you a little bit more about James and myself. We created an instrument called the Team Emotional and Social Intelligence Survey. It's the TESSI, and we're going to use all our knowledge in the nearly decade of work that we've had a full decade in this, James, and working on this team assessment. We're going to use some of those skills that we've developed over the last decade as we talk about this very interesting and I think, quite frankly, sometimes complex topic.
So let's look at why team members and the skills get tangled up sometimes. Team leader skills are really critical here. What if you've got a team leader who is conflict averse, and every time something comes up where there's a disagreement, he or she kind of tries to say, there, now, let's not get too excited. Let's just, keep this under wraps, or won't take a firm stand. This can be very difficult. If the team leader isn't comfortable, in fact, dealing with conflict, it tends to put a lid on your innovation. So that's one thing that we're going to be looking at. Confused mandates. So Marcia talked a little bit about this. Who gets all the attention? Is it the individual performer? Is it the person who actually may be in the background? They're an excellent team performer. Okay, they're the one who kind of may do some of the networking and may connect one idea from one team member to another team member. Do they get the attention? Do they get acknowledged? What about the collaborators, the people that help the various team members work together? So we're going to be looking at these kinds of things. We're also going to talk about role clarity. That's another time when teams and their talent tend to get tangled. And if my tongue doesn't get tangled by the time I said this 50 times, we could have picked a less
alliterative title.
Yes, a less alliterative title. Okay, so Dan Goleman, the guy who sort of kicked off the whole idea of emotional intelligence, has said very plainly, we are being judged by a new yardstick, not just how smart we are or by our training and expertise, but also how well we handle ourselves and each other. And when I think about that, how well we handle ourselves and each other, immediately the notion of self-compassion comes to mind. Are we treating each other with compassion? Are we treating ourselves with compassion? Are we expecting too much of ourselves? We also work with an individual assessment, the EQI, that looks at things like self-regard. And a lot of times I see my coaching clients have a lower self-regard simply because they hold themselves to such high standards. Do you do that? Are the standards you hold yourself to too high to be realistic? That's an example of kind of balancing the self-compassion. The team compassion, how well do we let other people contribute? How inclusive are we?
So what we want to do, of course, is we're laying the foundation for talking about emotional intelligence as we then go into how we untangle team and teamwork and team personalities, some of all of that. Let's look at what emotional intelligence is. So you'll hear it referred to as both EI and EQ. That is the same thing. They're not different. They're just different ways of referring to the same concept, which, as you can see here, is looking at our ability to understand our own emotions and manage them, as well as to recognize and respond effectively to those of others. Then that last part, responding effectively to those of others, is very much what we're talking about here. But should you be a leader yourself or coaching leaders, or maybe you're coaching board members who are leaders for an entire organization, whatever perspective you're coming from, if you don't understand your own EI, it's going to be very difficult to respond effectively to others. So it does include looking from a big picture perspective at what's going on here, and that's when we get very much into the team, where you're able to look at, let's say your team has 10 members. You have some sense of the individual 10 and the collective 10, how we're working together and how we can adapt to change. Now, a little bit of a difference in terms of understanding team emotional and social intelligence. When they engage with this to produce their work, they're really moving towards what we would call collaborative intelligence. We're going to be looking at 7 core competencies that teams use. And when they use them well together, they start collaborating at really a very internal level. So it becomes, in essence, an intuitive extra skill that they're able to build on and support as it moves forward. Collaboration and tangled are antonyms. So they're the opposite. When a team is collaborating, they're not tangling. Tangling means we're getting in each other's way and we're literally taking down or reducing team effectiveness.
So we're going to take another poll now. We'd like to figure out what your familiarity with EI is, EQ.
We're going to turn that over to you, Sarah, now to run that poll.
Exactly. So just log in for us here. Let us know. Are you somewhat familiar? Have you really looked at this a lot? If you're a pro, that would probably mean you've already taken some sort of an assessment and have looked at using EQ as part of your own development. These are topics that actually we've been developing since before we could speak. So our emotional intelligence isn't something that we're completely unfamiliar with, but we might not have had the language to describe it as effectively as we do now that there's a lot of assessments and a lot of discussion about it out there. But emotions are energy, and we need to keep that in mind. How are we using this invisible energy to influence the people around us?
Well, and let's see what those results are. It's looking quite solid. This is excellent. Over half, about 54%, are saying that they have some familiarity with it.
Good.
32% quite a bit, and
14% say they're a pro. So this is excellent. It'd be so fun if we were all in the same room together and people could, could share their skills and their stories and their experience. But we've gathered a much larger audience from a lot broader
really?
Geographical area than we could ever do that, and that's the advantage of technology. So here's a question: what's in it for me, and what's in it for my team? It turns out that Reuven Bar-On, who is a real pioneer in the field of emotional intelligence, his research showed that the higher the EQ score, the more positive the prediction for success in coping with environmental demands and pressures. So some of those environmental demands and pressures could be a change in budget. It could be that someone goes on maternity leave. It could be that you get a new team member who's used to doing things a different way. These are some of the questions that we really have to look at when we're untangling the questions of talent and teamwork, because the team's goals don't necessarily always correspond with the individual's goals until they get tuned up, until they get kind of correlated. So when it comes to team performance, a woman named Hilary Elfenbein has done a lot of research on whether the most important thing is to have individual team members with a high EQ skill, or to have a collective group that works well together. And her research really shows that both of those are important, and to maximize your team talent and your performance, you really need to have both of those working for you. You need to have individuals that are highly skilled, as well as the ability to kind of share the energy, so that the intelligence and the attention and the person speaking, the person representing the questions, so that this shifts a lot through the team, so that it's easy for people to communicate, and that requires trust. People have to trust each other in order to be effective at this. So sometimes our body language may be saying one thing, and we don't want that to be the case. We don't want it to be the fact that we're worried, so we're kind of putting a brave face on it. But the way we're talking and the way our body is communicating may be in variance, and that can actually start to erode team trust. Someone doesn't look very trustworthy if we know that they're worried or scared and they're just saying, "Oh yes, we can do it, hooray, hooray." So that's one place where trust can start to get undermined a little bit.
And of course, when you start undermining trust, that can immediately help us move towards that whole concept of derailment. What causes derailment at both the individual and the team level? And yes, we've seen derailed teams. We've been asked to go in and help them find the rails again when they just flat out fell off. And it can be done for sure, as long as there's support from upper leadership and the team members are willing to work on making that change. Human adults can make changes, but they can't if they don't want to. We have a lot of power in our lives in that sense. Derailment. The Center for Creative Leadership is one of our most profound organizations that's really operating in the U.S. as well as throughout the world, devoted a lot of their research energy to saying, what causes people to derail? Now, they were looking more at the individual level, but I think we can extrapolate this very well into a team. So you can see the three different skills that they've emphasized become a problem. Difficulty in handling change can cause someone to derail, of course. Not being able to work well in a team, poor interpersonal relationships. So these are all three very powerful parts, and they all play into that tangling that happens on a team. When you have some people who want to really show up and some people that maybe have the skills, but they maybe are deep introverts, they're just not going to, for whatever reason, whether it's introversion or anything else, they're not going to duke it out for center stage. When you have people with capability but who won't duke it out, then they're not working well in their team. And I would say that point two ends up applying to everybody. It can be, you can have the most accomplished leader caught up in this kind of derailment and not knowing what to do about this because the team members are so at each other. So what do we do? And of course, it gets even worse if the team leader maybe was just a fabulous IT person or engineer or architect or whatever, but never trained in how to work with teams and doesn't know what to do. Those folks can learn, but they have to want to again. So part of what we're talking about as we look at teams is they're similar in very important ways, and we're going to be emphasizing the similar a lot today as we're working together. However, there's of course differences. So what if we were trying to build a team in Gaza or in Kosovo, where people from very different ethnic backgrounds have been warring for decades, maybe even centuries? What if we were at a very highly creative company such as Apple, where everything is creative, competitive, and feels like it's top secret, although it's getting leaked just like it does in DC. So, or what if you're at the Air Force, U.S. Air Force, or any other nation's Air Force or other military command, where innovation must follow a chain of command, and yet where innovation is absolutely necessary. So we're just demonstrating that there can be a lot of different kinds of teams. We've worked with teams from every single one of these dimensions and organizations, and this is what we find is really very similar.
Yeah, the reason we chose those examples, Gaza, Kosovo, Apple, Air Force, all of those organizations have used the assessment that we're going to be referring to later to help indicate the specific skills that untangle teams and conflict. So when we've got this in place and we understand kind of what we want to do and need to do on our team, there's still some things that need to be done. We've still got to develop everyone's talent. We've got to have a way for giving everyone a chance to increase their skills. Everybody on the team is going to have different things that they're good at, different things that they're poor at. But everyone needs to have a chance to develop the areas where they're weaker and to employ the strengths they have. What about addressing negativity in the team? How do you do that? Do people on your team know when it's time for them to be quiet and let someone else lead? And that applies to the leader especially. Do they know when it's time to hand it off and solicit information from other team members? What about just listening with respect? Are you one of those teams where people have their hands under the desk or under the table and they're trying to do email or texting or something like that during the meeting? That is not going to work. What about a sense of humor? Do you know how to introduce humor? Typically, teams are good at this. This is one of the things that we find that is typically a strength of most teams. Their optimism, their happiness is usually something that they can rely on. Well, let's talk about, just for a moment longer, what about negativity? That's something that's pretty difficult. Maybe there's been a situation where one team member, or maybe a couple, are really opposed to the way that things seem to be going. What can you do? You can't really change the the directions that you've received from on high, from the VP or whoever, but just being able to recognize and pace what's going on. If you can just say, hey, listen, I get it that you're not happy with the way this is going, but I'm not sure what we can do about it. I'm going to say that again. I get it that you're not happy. But what is it that you think we can do about it? So you acknowledge that there's this feeling of conflict or disagreement in the team. What Elfenbein found out was that 40% of the difference between teams that are struggling and teams that are reaching their full capacity has to do with whether or not the team members each know what the others are feeling. And this goes back to what I said before. If somebody's putting a brave face on things, but they're actually nervous because they don't think they have enough information to do their job, the team has to be a safe enough place for that to come out. Otherwise, you're at risk. You've got a blind spot where you could suffer serious results. So again, if there's negativity, just address it. Say, I don't think this is working. I don't think you're happy with this. I don't know what we can do. What does everybody think?
Yeah, and I think, James, that going, first, I very much agree with you. The negativity can be one of the hardest things. And by the way, Yale University has done some research and found that a team calibrates to the same emotion within 2 hours. Now, fortunately, there's also research that positive emotion is more contagious than negative emotion, but all emotion is contagious. And especially if that negativity gets pounded in, that starts affecting the team dynamic at a very high level. Remember, 2 hours. I think if you've had a lot of that negativity, it's not going to take you 2 hours to adjust. Team's going to do it even faster.
Oh, for sure.
You end up being calibrated. So, sometimes we understand that concern is present and it's real. We acknowledge it. For right now, let's put that concern right over here on this table to the side. We're not going to forget it. It's going to stay in the room, but we're not going to address it at the moment because we're going to address some other topics. Then maybe when we're more resourceful later, we can come back. So you can find a lot of different strategies to get out of that negativity.
So when it comes to the team model, it's important to be able to combine the individual roles and the team roles. You've got to be wearing 2 hats all the time when you're on a team. You've got to bring your individual expertise to bear, and you've got to be able to contribute it in an effective enough way, even if you're an introvert, even if you don't like to speak up. It's important to the team's success that you be able to share your expertise in an effective manner. Now, guess what? If you've got introverts, people who are tend to listen first and then speak later rather than talk while they're
figuring out what they have to say.
Exactly, like the extroverts do, then you might need to invite them. You might need to say, okay, we've all heard, from the talkative ones here. What about Frank? What about you, sir? What have you got to say? You've been watching, so make some sort of an entree to draw them out. Make it safe for them. Demonstrate your respect for them, and they'll be willing to contribute. That's a way to make it easier for them.
And what we find is when the more quiet people speak up, that's when other people get quiet and listen, because they know that that's going to be a reflective comment that's based on what's been going on recently, and that there may well be some really good context to it. So I guess what we find is that what we really need to do is, in understanding team dynamics, is to work with a research-based model. Don't you think, James?
Absolutely.
Something that's well tested.
Absolutely. And that's what the TESI brings to this, the team emotional and social intelligence model that we're going to be looking at here in terms of the top team competencies that are necessary for teams to succeed. You've got to have skills in all of these areas.
And what we want to do is emphasize how to use these competencies to untangle the individual star performer or underperformer with the collective team sense. How do we pay attention to both, have kind of a both and world that actually brings out that collaborative intelligence while individuals know that they are succeeding?
Yeah, that's really critical. And thanks for pointing out the underperforming team member too, because we hadn't really gotten there yet. That's critical, because to be able to help someone come to the table, or in the case of maybe something like emotional awareness or communication, to help them curb some of their communicative habits or practices that are maybe shutting other people down. So you're absolutely right. We have to address that too. The most important point on this particular slide is the one right there at the center, because that's the place where all of these skills converge, and it indicates, and I want to emphasize the fact that they all co-influence each other. Conflict resolution has as much impact on communication and motivation as it does on positive mood. Just because they're side by side doesn't mean that they don't influence each other. So we've got positive mood, conflict resolution, stress tolerance, communication, emotional awareness, motivation, team identity. And that's what you're going to start with, right?
That's right. I'm going to start with team identity. And again, we want to be looking at these as competencies teams need, and then particularly adding that lens of how do I both help my individuals as well as my collective team be successful together. So first off, with the concept of team identity, we're talking about a sense of I know who my team is. It's great when you can have a team name. It might be functional name, like we're the IT team or we're the senior team. Sometimes teams give themselves names. Sometimes they give themselves baseball caps with their name on it or T-shirts or things like that. And those are strategies to build identity for sure, so that people have that sense of belongingness, some sense of pride about who we are, a desire to work together. Look at that. I mean, that's team, isn't it? A desire to work together. This is true whether it's a very senior governance board for one of the biggest corporations around the world. They need to have a desire to work together, just like that very first tier functional team that's beginning to do the new program design at some IT company. So a desire to work together. And then, how important is this? A sense of clarity around the room about whose role is this, whose role is that, what are our roles, what are our responsibilities? So, you know, as we say on this slide, teams tangle when roles and responsibilities aren't clarified. In other words, I might think that I'm most responsible for getting X done, and James could have exactly the same thought. If there's lack of clarity, who knows? And sometimes we have team leaders who really don't want to bother with the clarity, and so that's why that's happened. Other times we have very frustrated team leaders because they've told both Marcia and James over and over again who's supposed to do what, but we haven't done a good job listening. So it can come from all of these different directions.
I don't want to let her do that because that's my favorite thing. And even if she's been tasked with it, I want to kind of cut in on that. That sort of an attitude is something that both teams, well, I want to say it this way, that both leaders and teams are responsible to quell. Just because the team leader may not have said anything about it doesn't mean that you as a team member can't speak up and say, hey, Marcia and James, get it together here. Everybody knows Marcia's the one who's supposed to do this.
So, you know, you could write down a couple of words. One of them would be fear, and the other one would be, well, I don't know, you tell me. Do you want to put in engagement? Do you want to put in positivity? There's a lot of ways of being the other. But, you know, I think what James was just saying can be fear-based. Like, I'm afraid, I'm good at this, and if I don't get to do it, then part of what I excel at won't be noticed. And that's a legitimate concern. Somehow or another, it needs to be addressed, either by the individual saying, it's okay, I'm just going to live with that, it's what's so, or by going to the team leader and saying, is there some way where I can use this skill as well? You know, so that's when you bring in the communication competency that we'll talk about in a minute. But while we present all of these skills or all these competencies in a circle and we show that there's an equal importance to all of them, there's a reason we start with team identity, because it is so amazingly foundational. Roles and responsibilities. And ways in which we can distribute roles and responsibilities so everyone feels important, not these important roles go to these two star performers and everybody else, well, you just support them. That's what will completely eliminate the possibility of effective team collaboration.
Yes, more often than not, when we start working with a team that we've assessed with the TESI, team identity is the best place to start. By strengthening that, sometimes it'll be a strength and we'll make it stronger. Sometimes it'll be pretty weak and we'll help them build that up. But that is so foundational, as Marcia said. Let's talk about motivation. Oh, the one thing I want to say, each one of these has a single word that you can use to capture. For team identity, it's belong. If I feel like I belong to the team, okay, then that means that my identity is integrated with the team's identity. For motivation, okay, this is all about energy levels. Remember I said emotion is actually energy. It's an invisible energy that we use. And emotion and motivation come from the same Latin root, emovere, which means to move. Emotions are what move us. They're what motivate us. So to help someone get in touch with the emotions that they need to maybe work late 3 nights in a row, or to take a risk and do some research in a brand new direction, it's an emotional event, and it's emotional support that we're kind of required to develop and deliver. So it has to know with, this has to do with how good a job we do at setting goals too. Because if we're not setting clear enough goals, and if we're not reinforcing them effectively, and if we're not helping people develop the impulse control and the self-discipline to stay persistent with the goal, it's going to be pretty hard to reach them. Our kind of note on this one is that teams tangle when individual skills are rewarded more than team results.
And I think this can be a really tough one, because your organization may well be set up for organizing and rewarding around those individual skills. So is there a way to, in essence, perturbate the system, come up with a new framework that also rewards teams? What could you do to make that kind of big change? Because until you do, if the rewards are focused on individual behavior, then smart individuals stay more individually oriented than team oriented.
And this includes compensation. This is a difficult thing for a lot of organizations to figure out how to link compensation with teamwork, as well as incentivizing individual productivity. So that's something that your team may have to get pretty creative about. Okay, let's move on. For motivation, it's move. That's the one word. How do we get everybody moving in the same direction? Emotional awareness. This relates to the slide earlier about Elfenbein's research on the fact that 40% of the difference between effective teams and those that are failing is a result of not knowing what other people feel on the team and not having an open, expansive conversation about that. So the ability to say, wow, it seems like you're feeling pretty nervous right now because I don't think you've got enough information to get your report finished. That could be a really helpful thing to reflect. Or the person might say, no, I'm not feeling nervous about that. Actually, I'm feeling nervous because my mom's in the hospital and we don't know, what the results are on those tests. Great to know. So this person's got some real concern about family matters. That's going to mean that, all of their attention may not be available. Maybe that's not going to be the person we're going to send into the meeting with senior staff to make the presentation. Not this time. So noticing and understanding and having a feel for what's going on for each of your team members emotionally and being able to share that and be open about that has a huge amount to do with how effectively you're going to be able to be motivated and stay motivated. So what we say is that teams tangle when team cohesion is undervalued and there isn't time for enhancing interpersonal relationships. What do you know about the people on your team besides their job at work? Do you have a connection that has to do with the things they care about most personally? They didn't come to work to do that job. Well, certainly they did to some degree, but they've got this job to make the rest of their life work. What do you know about the rest of their life? If you don't know anything about it, you don't know what's really motivating.
We're going to talk about mentoring as one of the strategies to balance out and expand team power a little later. And I think emotional awareness has to be just a prime component of starting mentoring.
Absolutely. And the one word for emotional awareness is feel. What do we feel? Communication. Communication, if we meet with a team leader or even a team and say, well, what's the trouble? What is it that your team's struggling with? 90% of the time, they'll say, it's communication. Communication is where we're stuck, and I'm sure that's true. The fact of the matter is emotional intelligence, or EQ, or whatever you want to call it, is actually an advanced communication technology. It's all about how well we communicate about the invisible influence of our emotional energy. Now, what does it have to do? It has to provide feedback on how well the team members listen, on how well they encourage participation, on how well they discuss sensitive matters. This idea of feedback and listening. We've got to be good at listening, and we've got to be good at giving feedback. For a long time, the single word that described communication was listen. Because actually in my profession, I've made virtually all of the money that I've made based on my listening skills. or at least that's what I thought. But it turns out we've also got to be able to give feedback. We've got to be able to talk about what we've heard when we've listened. So for this one, it's split. Feedback and listening. Those are kind of two sides of the same coin. You've got to make sure that you're providing feedback so everybody's on the same page and that everybody's listening honestly to what's going on. So our thought is that teams tangle when communication is focused between individuals and there's competition for the data. So if you've got individuals, okay, that are having a conversation amongst themselves and kind of excluding the whole team, or there's a situation where people want to, they want to be the star, they want to get ahead, they want to win, so there's destructive competition for the data, then the team's tangled up.
You managed to say that straight still.
I did. I'm getting better.
You're good. All right. Stress tolerance is the next skill as we go around, competency rather, as we go around the wheel. And by the way, the difference between competency and skill is quite meaningful. Competency is a bigger concept. It takes several different individual skills to accomplish a competency. So given that teams are made up of multiple people, we're dealing more with the competency level. When we work with an individual assessment, such as the EQI, we would work with 16 different skill levels. And those skill levels, of course, help us accomplish the competencies. So that's how that dance proceeds. All right, so stress tolerance. Do you think this one matters? Have you ever seen a highly stressed team? Have you ever wondered when they're highly stressed just exactly how sustainable this is? How about asking how well they're actually making their decisions? Are they sustainable? And if they're highly stressed, what happens when they leave the office? Are they at their best when they're driving? Are they at their best when they're responding to their family or their community? There are a lot of consequences as well as rewards that are tied into how we manage stress. And as James loves to point out, this is the one of all of competencies that is most closely related to physical well-being. Healthy teams are more productive teams, and they're certainly happier teams. So managing stress, I think people really get that we need to manage stress, that people would agree it's a no-brainer. However, how do we do it? It is so much one hand saying, yes, I want to manage stress. The other hand says, and we've got to keep up with the competition. We've got to move fast. We've got to. And, then it's just squashed. So we're looking for getting a reflection and setting enough priority with some real solid behavioral constraints that keep us from moving into the seduction of working too much. And I honestly think it's a seduction. It's interesting, James and I were just watching a documentary recently that emphasized how much time off people have in Europe and compared that negatively to how much we have in the United States. Who's got less stress? Who's likely to live longer, and more of the statistics are showing that. For a wide variety of reasons, but part of it is we've got to nurture our whole system. One of the questions under the TESI is, I support my teammates in having a work-life balance. So the opposite of that is I'm competitive with my teammates to be sure I get the most projects done. So which way do you go? Are you being competitive? Now, how does that relate to tangling between the individual and the team? What do we want to do? When our skills are developed, they're going to tangle when they're developed without equality and balance. And equality is a big picture concept. It doesn't mean everybody has 10 of this and 8 of that. That's what happened. I grew up in a big family. That's what happened in my family. Everybody had to get exactly the same number of pieces of fudge or whatever that were made. Teams have got to operate on a much more sophisticated format. So as they're doing it, equality means I have respectful opportunities in which to engage with my team members. That's what we're looking for equality. We're not equating the number of qubits or number of dots or whatever that there might be. And there has to be enough of a sense of balance so that we don't have some people worn out and other people under tapped into, so to speak. So we're looking at stress tolerance as one of the most important ones that are critical for everybody to work with. And then The final, or next one, it's not quite final one that we're working on, conflict resolution. This is actually the hardest one of all. And we have found that from a decade of research, really a decade plus of research, that team members, when they're rating themselves, will come out with conflict resolution very frequently being the lowest rated skill. The second one that comes out is stress tolerance, because in our highly competitive environments, effectively working with stress is not done well often. So when we're talking about conflict resolution, we're addressing how constructively the team conducts the process of disagreement. And I just love the way that that's presented. How we work with disagreement. How do we do a good job with this? How do we help ourselves take advantage of seeing things differently? So teams are going to tangle when competition is encouraged rather than collaboration. Yet, we need to have the ability to have disagreements. So the problem with competition is when it's done in any kind of way to make somebody less and somebody else more. When it's a value assessment that's resulting in missing the collective power. We can have a good competition, such as maybe some of you participate in marathons or half marathons or 5Ks or whatever. That can be incredibly healthy competition. It helps us push ourselves to be better. Competition between two parts of a team or two different teams in an organization to design the best widget could be one of the best things that happens. It's how it gets interpreted, how it gets responded to. And I think one of the most powerful ways to do that is literally to practice conflict resolution skills. Practice them. So we've just been asked to work with another organization, a very important foundation from our perspective, because we appreciate their goals. And as we're working with that foundation, they're concerned that they really are kind of at loose ends on working with conflict. And I think that happens a lot when we're in a place where we want to feel good. We want to squash the conflict. We want to pretend it doesn't happen. In fact, teams need to go through a process of divergent thinking. And when we can do that, that means that Tom thinks one thing about this product and Abigail is able to view it very differently, and they can have a respectful conversation. Now, for some of you, even saying that has caused you to start thinking about our divided world, etc. And that is something that we've been talking about a lot this year, of the divided world. There's no doubt that conflict resolution skills help us learn how to listen to each other with respect. We may end up with different opinions or positions, but we're behaving respectfully. What's the one word for stress and for conflict, James?
It's interesting. Didn't appear on any of the slides, but it's breathe.
For stress. For
stress, take a deep breath. Breathing can reset the rhythms in our physical bodies. It's interesting because 36% of U.S. workers suffer from work-related stress, and 28% of working adults said their job negatively affects their eating habits, 27% their sleeping habits, and 22% their weight. 22% of the people in the workforce feel like the way that they work and the emotional atmosphere that they're in has a negative impact on their eating.
Well, and a lot of that would have to do with how much we do. It might be we love our job, we love the people we work with, but we're working so darn hard that somehow we've spent some of those breathing qubits that otherwise we could have. We just operate really with more tension. So literally, we're moving closer to where we're going to be giving you specific strategies, and we've been building those in. I hope you've been hearing them as we've been talking through each of these slides, but practice conflict resolution skills. Practice sometimes talking with each other, maybe in pairs or whatever you want to do in small groups, going through some issue where you really intend to disagree. Intend to disagree and practice how you can do that elegantly. All right.
So the one word for conflict resolution is risk. If things are stuck and you're not able to resolve the conflict, take a risk. Risk letting people know a little bit more about your position and what you think is going on.
Yeah, and I just went back to the conflict because I think that is so important. And we did have a chapter in we've written 7 books on emotional and social intelligence. And in a book that we have that's really a compendium of recommendations and reflections from EI leaders across the world on what works and what doesn't work, so you can build your skill application. We wrote a chapter on conflict resolution and really looked at what does it take to build this muscle, conflict resolution muscle in a team. And I think you should think of it very directly, very concretely as a muscle, one that lets us take risks, but also that lets us appreciate. And I would say that that could be the other side. Maybe we, for something as complex as conflict, we need 2 one-words.
Well, it's a muscle that needs to know how to relax as well as how to tense. So you've got to be able to contract it as well as relax it.
Nice. All right, positive mood. I like that. You know, what a nice way to set that up. You know, we're looking at encouragement, sense of humor. James mentioned, and we've universally noticed this, teams do a pretty good job often of being able to laugh, not take things too seriously. That laughter is important, and if you have a chance to help encourage that for any teams that you influence, do it. Of course, we have to get down to, you know, the real work and get it done and all that, but there's no doubt that the conflict is going to help us do that. All right, so teams tangle when fearful attitudes prevail, and we really miss out on some of the can-do. There's so much research that supports positive mood, and we have found that this is the easiest one for teams to develop. So if you've got a team really in trouble, start with building their positive mood, their positive attitude. And then you can go to their motivation, save conflict resolution and communication for a little later down the road after they've started building some of their other muscles.
So when it comes to using metrics with a team and actually diagnosing where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, where's the team stuck, what does it need to do, you've got to have insightful and confidential questions that all the team members are required to answer. And what's important is that these questions are we questions. It's not about I. It's not about what I do. It's not about how I see things. It's about how we see things. And if we move to the next slide, we can...
Well, wait, James. I realized I forgot to ask you the key word for positive.
Oh,
somebody's writing these down and feeling frustrated on that.
I know. It's optimism.
Oh, of course.
Optimism. So in other words, being able to see the glass half full.
There you go.
So these are some of the items that you would answer if you were to take the test. We are honest with one another. Our members feel safe within the team. We respect relationships when solving problems. We are each clear on our roles. Our team members are willing to risk disagreement. So you can see this isn't about I. This isn't about what I think. It's about what everybody thinks from your point of view. Now, the ability to answer these kinds of questions, these are some of the critical questions that all teams have to, that really point to whether or not they're operating skillfully or not. If you're not honest with one another, everybody's going to know it. If the members don't feel safe within the team, again, people are going to know it. So this allows the assessment to kind of out some of the elephants that may be in the room. So here's the model for looking at teamwork. We've looked at the 7 skills around the outside.
Competencies.
The competencies around the outside. Empathy, trust, loyalty, better decisions. Those are sort of the 4 corners of the assessment. But I want to focus really here in a few moments on sustainable productivity and emotional and social well-being. This is about tasks and relationships, how well we do the problem solving, how well we do the empathy that is necessary for teams to work effectively. This is what gives us the ability to hold each other accountable. If we're not demonstrating that and building a climate for that emotional and social well-being, then it's hard to hold people accountable because they're not necessarily going to be so comfortable telling the truth. And that accuracy is what we need to be effective as a team. Excellent.
Okay, so let's look specifically at some of the strategies to expand your team's or any team's talents. And these are really drawing upon what we've been talking about throughout this webinar. Being aware of strengths and weaknesses at both the individual and team level. there's places where I know that I personally have strengths, and as I was just talking with the group last week, I said, you know, no matter how long you sent me to architecture school, you better not have me build a building or draw the architecture design for the building, because it's just not a skill that I happen to have. So that's the kind of thing that'll happen as you go around the team, you know, where we do have strengths and opportunity areas. How do we maximize those strengths and keep working from it? We don't need to pay a lot of attention to weaknesses other than finding those strengths and being sure that they get to be out there in a leadership way, but of course noticing the next bullet, how well those strengths and the opportunities are balanced together. You are almost always going to find a team where a couple people are more natural at some of the team requirements than other people. What can you proactively do to help lower performers? Sometimes it's the most obvious, and that is let them go to some training, let them get to practice it. So do that. But the next bullet can be one of the most powerful. Use mentoring as well as other skill sharing. I think deliberate mentoring programs is something that I suspect we're going to be using more and more in businesses.
Absolutely, there's no question. Research shows it's an enormously effective way to do on-the-job training.
Yeah, and to share skills, and people feel good about it. You know, if you are someone else's mentor and you start seeing them do a job well, you're probably proud of them rather than feeling maybe defensive or whatever because, oh, that person learned that, and now what am I going to do that's special? Do we need to be individually special? I know we need to be individually recognized. It is a human need. So we've got to know how to recognize each person as well as the collective, and it's really looking at those ways. Mentoring is a way of getting past some of that unhealthy competition. All right, here are a few more ideas. Sometimes candor. I think earlier, James, you talked about risk with conflict resolution.
Right.
You know, can we risk talking directly with one another? Can we risk telling truth? You know, you can always risk telling the truth if you'll do so with compassion. That's the difference. And that doesn't mean you have to tell somebody, you know, your haircut just looks awful. Why did you ever choose something like that? We don't have to get personal. That's silly. You know, what we can do, though, is say, I really noticed that you did this and it worked. And I was wondering if I might provide some tips for how this other part that might have been a little harder for you, how that went on. You know, so some of the candid ways to discuss with the team as a whole, as well as with people one-on-one. How are plum assignments and opportunities distributed? Now we can think of this with a classic team, a team that's got certain demands, a call center team that's got to get certain things out during the day, but each person individually also has to get a certain amount accomplished. Someone who's building a specific product that's going to be shipped and is measured. But let's take it to governance. There are definitely plum assignments in governance and some that are just not so interesting, or ones where somebody could be put on a committee where they clearly have no power because they don't understand it, that's not their background. So we need to notice at every single level where we have groups together, where we're asking for group product, whether we're calling them a team, we're calling them a board, we're calling them whatever, how are we distributing, recognizing, and encouraging that multiple level of engagement, which gets us to exhibit trust and respect throughout the team. Now, in today's divided world, are you having trouble exhibiting trust and respect throughout the team? If so, think about it and find some ways. And I think this is where we're calling for demonstrating leadership courage, isn't it, James?
Yes, it's certainly about that. And it's also about the ability, when you mentioned compassion, we need to create an atmosphere in the team where it's kind of understood. I'm not going to try to advance at your expense. I'm certainly trying to advance and develop and achieve the promotional goals that I seek, but I'm not going to try to do it at your expense.
Excellent. Now, in this slide, we've given you a couple of the kinds of questions that you might hear from teams and some ways of responding. I think a key opportunity to think about in your response is just how do we together look at ways to build upon skills, tasks, purpose, so that we come together as we're doing that building.
So the biggest challenge to effective teamwork is the failure to listen and understand how to act together. And this has a lot to do with accuracy, but what I suggest is that you develop a workflow model that details the communication process and the task sequence. So in other words, you know the sequence of tasks that your team has to do to solve the problems that it's charged with solving, and how the communication interfaces and how it plays back and forth with the people to accomplish that.
Which will give us collaborative intelligence.
So President Woodrow Wilson, at least did this for us. He said, "I not only use all the brains I have, but all that I can borrow." Share the skills, share the information, share the celebration and the acknowledgement within your team.
Indeed. And I think that's where we get to really a composite capability. Organizational action that people can take are...
Well, again, it kind of boils down to the same thing. We need to be able to respect each other. That is the key to effective teamwork at every moment. And that's what the compassion is all about. By acknowledging each other and expressing gratitude, we demonstrate that respect, both at the individual and at the team level.
So one of my favorite ways of bringing this together, and we'll have time for a few questions, went to Michael Jordan. And one of the times he was told by a coach early in his career, you know, Michael, if you can't pass, you can't play. With 5,633 career assists, 32,000 points scored, Michael Jordan learned to pass. And he and the Chicago Bulls learned a lot about how teamwork yields exceptional performance and sustainable yield. And I think that's exactly what we need to focus on. You know, Michael Jordan was, and always will be considered a star performer, and couldn't have gone and won that basketball game on his own. So with that, Sarah, we're going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. And unfortunately, we don't have time for that live Q&A, but attendees, please go ahead and shoot any questions you have into that chat box. We'll be putting those into a Word document, and we'll be sending those over to Marshall and James, and they'll always answer your questions.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, everybody's questions will be answered, so you won't be ignored. But just big thanks for joining today. If you could please advance, thank you. We're offering a 25% off of Team Emotional and Social Intelligence, and you can use that coupon code that you see on that slide right there. Go over to HRDQ-store.com, and that's going to be good until October 11th. So, Marcia and James, would you just like to add any final thoughts before I go ahead and wrap up?
Well, it's such a pleasure getting the chance to be with folks, and we would like to answer your questions, so don't hesitate in sending them forward. Thank you for your care and concern about quality in our work.
Yes, absolutely. We're thinking of developing a forum where we can actually answer questions on a regular basis for people. It may turn out to be some kind of a newsletter or something like that. You might kick it off here. So please send us your questions. We promise we'll answer every single one.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to HRDQ.
Right, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much to you both. That is all the time we have today. Everybody on the line, we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Thanks, everyone.